What are the ramifications of President Trump's welfare plan for farmers who have been decimated by Trump's trade war against China? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we examine that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. Welcome to this week's Libertarian Angle. I'm joined by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
It's good to see you and to be with our viewers and listeners as always.
Yep. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, as always, for your great support of FFF. Please keep in mind that we're now in our end of year fundraising drive. We really need your support. You guys have kept us going for 36 years, and we really need your help. This is the biggest time of the upcoming year for us in terms of resources to get us through the year. And anything you can do to give us a generous hand, we'd be very, very honored and very, very appreciative, just as y'all have done for 36 years now. So, Richard, we got some developments on the tariff front, some interesting developments. We've talked about the bankruptcy of American farmers in the past, that when Trump started his trade war against China, he said, well, this is a fairly easy, trade wars are kind of easy to win. And from everything I can see, China was ready for him. And they were well prepared for what their response was going to be, which was very predictable in terms of retaliation. You and I have always argued that that's the worst kind of response you can make, but it's a predictable response. And one of those measures that China took was that we're not going to buy crops from American farmers anymore. And so they began buying like soybeans, for example, from Argentina. Well, not surprisingly, this starts to send American farmers, soybean farmers especially, into bankruptcy. They've now lost out on a huge market that they were accustomed to, that they were dependent on. This is what trade does. It creates interdependencies. And now all of a sudden they've got all this money invested in these soybean crops. And because Trump started this trade war, China retaliates. Now they're in a crunch. And it was also predictable, though, because this is exactly what happened the last time Trump was president. So what has Trump now done? Well, he's doing the exact same thing he did during his first term. He says, I'm going to establish a welfare program. Now, he doesn't call it a welfare program, but that's what it is. A welfare program for these American farmers, which entails taking U.S. taxpayer money and giving them a welfare payment to cover their loans, farm loans that they have, and cover their losses, or at least part of their losses. And of course, the farmers are not going to object. Who's going to object to free money? Not very many people, especially when you're going broke and you owe the bank and you're looking, staring at bankruptcy in the face. You're going to take the money almost always. It's not surprising, but notice this what this system does. I mean, it is so highly destructive. It's sheer immorality that it puts these farmers in a mindset of gratitude to the federal government. Oh, thank you for saving me. And very soon the farmers start, forgetting that it was the government that caused the problem. It's like the government, breaking a guy's legs and then saying, "Hey, we're going to give you free crutches or a free wheelchair." And the person says, "Oh, thank you, helping me out so much." And it makes the farmers dependent, you know, in gratitude to the government, and then under control. Because look what happens. We've seen this with the universities, that when the universities go on the dole, they have to conform to whatever President Trump tells them how to run their universities, because they don't want to lose their dole. And that's now the farmers. The farmers are not going to want to lose their dole. And then but Trump says, well, I'm going to use the tariff money I'm collecting. But wait a minute, I thought it was the foreign countries that were paying the tariffs. Now he's admitting that this was just a tax increase that he's imposing on the American people. on his own initiative. He didn't go to Congress and say, "I want to raise taxes on the American people." He just raised the taxes. And then, of course, that caused this whole cascading sequence of events. So, Richard, it's a despicable system. I mean, it's surprising to me that we still have to argue over principles of free trade. The good news, as we pointed out in the past, is that it seems to me that the predominance of opinion in America is in favor of free trade, especially among the mainstream economic commentators. And if there's anything good that's coming out of this, it's reflecting that the work that we libertarians have done emphasizing free trade over the last 36 years has paid off, not in terms of Trump himself, but in terms of so many people in the mainstream that now realize that we've been right on the virtues of free trade. What do you think about all this?
Well, first, first, everything you've said is obviously correct as I see it. But this is a financial catastrophe for the farmers. The estimates that I've seen is that due to the basically the boycott of American agricultural goods of various sorts, including soybeans, that the Chinese are undertaking, and they're shifting of purchases of these crops to other countries. Argentina, you mentioned, Brazil is a major one who's going to be gaining. I've seen an estimate that the American farm community is likely to use anywhere between 35 to $43 billion in revenues and sales. Now, Trump, in announcing this special, what he called bridge program for the farmers, is offering 12 billion. So the farmers are losing between 35 and 43 billion dollars of sales revenues from China. And Trump is going to give them what? Something that's about the equivalent of a third of their loss, uh, $12 billion, which, by the way, is not expected to be showing up in farmers' hands until February. But this just shows the absurdities and the idea that one intervention just leads to another. First, Trump misunderstands, either intentionally or because of his economic illiteracy, the impact of tariffs. The tariffs are not a tax, as you were saying, on the foreign exporter whose good you're bringing into your own country, but it's a tax on the American importer. The fact is, the goods arrive at the port of entry, and they cannot be taken out of the port of entry by the wholesale importer of that good until that wholesale importer pays a tax to the U.S. customs agents. So it is the importer who's paying a tax. And since that then represents an additional cost of production for him, he paid the foreign supplier for the good. There's been the incurring of the transportation expenses to bring it from the country of origin to the United States. And now there's the additional expense of doing so, of paying this tax. So this ends up being at least partly, unless the importer wishes to eat part of the cost, so as not to lose domestic business, he's going to have to pass on most or all of that cost into his sale price, which means the price will rise. The good will be more expensive to the American consumers. All other things held given, as the price rises for anything, demanders tend to buy at the margin less of it, so there'll be less sales. So even at a higher price, price times quantity, the seller of the good, the imported good in the United States, may end up with even less revenue than he had before from the sale. So everybody's losing. The American consumer pays a higher price, tends to buy less of it. The revenues the import seller may earn may be reduced. And on top of that, of course, the exporter in the other country will have suffered losses. So this is affecting everyone negatively. But notice, while the foreign supplier may lose some business due to this process, who are the major sufferers? Upon whom does most of the incidence of this import tax fall? The American consumer and the American importer, supplier, seller. They're the individuals who are going to be most harmed due to this imposing of an import tax known as a tariff. Now, then there's the additional thing. From a free market, free trade point of view, what should the Chinese have said if they were following a free trade perspective? They would have said, it's a great tragedy that the United States is imposing these tariffs on us, but we're not going to retaliate, because if we retaliate and cut ourselves off from American food exports, we will either have to do without those types of agricultural goods, or find alternative markets in other countries where the prices to buy them may be equal to, but more likely higher than what we were paying from the American suppliers. And that has the negative impact on Chinese consumers, Chinese importers of those goods. Okay. So that just multiplies the problem. As one person said, one country imposes a tariff on your commodities, and that's like a slap on the face. And then you retaliate, and it's like hitting yourself on the other cheek. And ouch, that even hurt more. Well, that's what it amounts to. So the wise policy that the Chinese should have done is says, if Americans want to be stupid, that's their problem, not ours. But of course, in a world of statism, nationalism, economic ignorance on the part of the Chinese government, as much as the Trump administration, the retaliation is introduced. And that just exacerbates the entire problem. Now, how does Trump respond to this? Well, he says that the farmers are losing this 35 to 43 billion dollars a year in sales to China. So we're going to give them a bridge subsidy of up to $12 billion dollars. Well, that's only one third of what his stupid trade policy is costing the farmers. But notice the other thing that you alluded to as well, if I can sort of pick up on that, that the farmers are happy not to turn down this money. Well, the farmers have been happy not to turn down government money since the 1920s. Since the 1920s, the farmers have had what are called farm price supports. The U.S. government has guaranteed a floor on many agricultural goods, a price floor. So if the market were to set the price at X, the U.S. government says, well, you don't have to accept price X. We're going to guarantee you price plus, let's say, 3. And anything that you can't sell at a price plus 3 to consumers in the market, we'll buy the surplus. All that you produce that you cannot sell to American consumers at our guaranteed price floor, we'll buy up the surplus from you. And at whose expense? American taxpayers' expense. The U.S. government has been doing this for dairy products and other agricultural goods since the 1920s. This has cost the U.S. taxpayer over those decades hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. And of course, the farmers have just gotten used to taking these handouts, these subsidies at above market prices to whom they sell the surpluses. Now this program comes along and their hand is out again because they figure, well, this is just another version of the government guaranteeing us, securing us, protecting us, keeping us warm and comfortable from the winds and forces of market forces and the bad policies of our own government and other governments. So this just exacerbates it and just reinforces what Ludwig von Mises and other economists have pointed out, that the introduction of one intervention creates imbalances, distortions, problems for which the government, rather than admitting its mistake and removing its earlier intervention, then imposes a new intervention to try to compensate for the negative consequences of its first intervention. And then this snowballs and snowballs and snowballs. And particularly under Trump, we just see that his policies are taking the United States even further and further away from whatever market-based relationships and forces that have been at work. He has become one of the biggest state socialist, semi-fascist, economic fascist presidents in modern history. Farm subsidies, tariffs, telling industries where to produce, when to produce, for what to produce, the buying of shares in companies that he manipulates and blackmails. These farm policies and these tariffs are just little chunks of a wider edifice of economic illiteracy in the form of Donald Trump's economic fascism.
Well, you make a lot of good points. One of the points you made about the retaliation on the part of China and other countries is an interesting one because it's certainly true that China retaliated, especially with that rare earths thing. They were ready for that one. They knew that Trump would have to capitulate when they put a almost a total ban on the exportation of rare earths, and they had already ensured that the U.S. rare earths market had been decimated because of the low prices they'd been charging. But there was an op-ed, I think it was in today's Wall Street Journal, maybe yesterday's, by Don Boudreaux and Phil Gramm, saying that the overall response of the world to what Trump has started has been actually to maintain a commitment to free trade with respect to other countries, that they've
Yes.
been trying to expand trade instead of going into the smooth Hawley mindset of, oh, we're going to raise our barriers on everybody in the world. We're going to establish autarky, self-sufficiency, and so forth. And that while the United States is isolating itself with Trump's trade war against everybody, the rest of the world is doing differently. They're expanding trade relations and therefore improving their standard of living. And I think that's one of the important things we got to recognize in this, that to the extent that any government, including the Trump government, interferes with people's ability to trade, they're diminishing people's economic well-being. Because in every trade, both sides benefit. You're giving up something you value less for something you value more. So if you're trading with a Chinese or a Vietnamese, you're improving your standard of living at the moment of the trade, just like he is. And so Trump's actually causing people to be worse off economically. And that should matter to people because of this affordability thing. I mean, the prices people are paying are soaring. If you compare grocery prices, for example, to a year ago, I mean, it's humongous, and everybody's noticing this. I mean, this is how this guy Mamdani got elected in New York on the affordability thing. His point is his socialism's bad news, but his point is very valid. That things for a lot of people are no longer affordable: cars, groceries, and so forth. One of the good parts about what's going on with this Trump thing, and for one thing, is that the Supreme Court may yet declare Trump's tariff scheme unconstitutional, which they clearly should. Clearly, he has come up with this ruse of, I think it was a Trading with the Enemy Act or some World War One doctrine that justifies his trade war. Uh, and so there are people that are questioning the constitutionality of it. It's reached the Supreme Court, but also the fact that Costco has filed suit against the U.S. government is fantastic. I mean, here's this major company that is saying, we're not scared of you, Donald Trump, like these university presidents are, and university boards are, and so forth, like these big law firms that have capitulated to you. We are suing you, and we're suing for the return of our money. Now, this is a store, Costco, that has purchased things from China and for resale where they did pay the tariff. Now, as you point out, inevitably they're going to pass that cost on to their customer, but they're saying we want our money back from these tariffs. Richard, it is so inspiring to see a big company take on the government because you see so much deference to authority and fear, and CEOs of banks and everything that are so scared to take on the government, and big company executives and so forth. The fact that Costco's not scared to take on these people, I think is fantastic.
The other thing that is sort of a peculiar and almost um, so unbelievable twist to this in terms of Trump's behavior is that precisely because of what happened during his first term in office, imposing tariffs on China, the Chinese retaliating with agricultural goods and so on, it's as if he learns nothing. He was he so stupid? Is he so stupid to think, well, we're so great and we're so powerful that everyone will be just totally intimidated and just roll over and play dead. We'll impose these high tariffs, and the Chinese would never think of retaliating. Why the American market is so important to them. And yet this happens again. Now, he either has a level of economic illiteracy and short-term memory that makes him even worse than sleepy Joe Biden, or or he has advisors who whisper in his ears that he just absorbs what they say with a naive innocence that makes him unfit for the White House. If anyone who talks to him can feed him such economic nonsense, and he just says, "Well, I guess so. Let's do it." The economic illiteracy that is guiding the U.S., well, all policies in general for the most part, but certainly the trade policies, is beyond all human reason. It, he's got to be one of the worst presidents on this in modern history.
Well, the other factor is, and I know there's a lot of conservatives that have come out against his tariffs and his trade wars and so forth, but a lot of the conservative movement is backing him, the MAGA movement and so forth. And what I find so bizarre in this is the notion, the mindset that the more tax revenues that come into the coffers of the federal government, the better off the American people are. I mean, that to me is an incredible mindset because it used to be that conservatives would say the more money that is left in the hands of the American people, uh, that brings about capital accumulation, savings, makes workers more productive. I mean, that used to be the standard economic mindset of conservatives, the libertarian mindset. And that's how standards of living rise, is you limit the government's ability to take money out of the private sector. I mean, if you follow it to its logical conclusion, if more money in the hands of the federal government makes people better off economically, why not have the government take 90% of people's income with the income tax? Why not 100% tariff across the board? Just think all that money flooding into the government coffers. Think how wealthy America would be. That is a bizarre mindset, Richard. It's shocking to me that conservatives now subscribe to that mindset.
Well, it's due to Trump's rhetoric. We're not paying for it. It's free money. We jack up the tariff, and the other guy in the other country pays. We're getting revenues to reduce the debt or to cover part of the deficit, and it's not costing Americans anything. It's free money that they pay us. Ha ha ha. And the chickens come home to roost because who's actually paying it? As I was explaining, it's the American wholesale importer who has to pay those import taxes at point of entry and then has that as the higher costs of doing business that either sooner or later, partially or totally, get passed on to the consumers. But even if the importer, the seller, does not pass on the entire tax to his customers, that eats into his profit margins. At lower profits, that means less revenues, net revenues, with which he can invest, add to his capital equipment, raise the productivity of his labor force with higher wages in the future. So, in fact, all you're doing is slowing down economic growth at the expense of those businesses and certainly the American consuming public and the country as a whole. So it is the most counterproductive and absurd policy that you can imagine. But this rhetoric, they're paying for it. It's free money. It doesn't cost you a thing. Is the cover behind what a lot of this is going on.
Yeah, and then the other factor to consider is the political one, where the people that benefit from protectionism, the businesses that are protected
Right.
from competition, oh, they love it. Oh, I don't have to worry about competition because Trump's taking care of the competition, and I can raise my prices here. I can keep having shoddy service and shoddy
Right.
whatever. While the people that are hurt, they're dispersed, and so they don't have the political influence that the few that are benefiting from this policy have. And so, you and I have talked about in the past, but I think it's worth reminding people about the free trade movement in Great Britain in the 1800s. That it was a phenomenal thing that when Richard Cobden and John Bright were leading the free trade movement in Great Britain, among their principal backers were poor people.
Yes.
And you've pointed out that story of where in one of the protests, a guy had a cannon with a little sign, a placard that said "Free trade or this," which meant you either adopt free trade or I'm going to fire this cannon at your government positions. And the idea was that poor people, people at the bottom of the economic ladder, came to the realization that they were being taken to the cleaners, and that the free trade was harming them. And they succeeded. Cobden and Bryce succeeded in getting free trade in Great Britain. And so to me, if we can get to a point where the people that are really getting squeezed with this affordability problem, that can't afford going to the grocery store anymore, can't afford getting a new car, so forth, if they come to the realization that these kind of policies, along with the policies, easy money policies of the Federal Reserve and so forth, then I think we got a real shot at reversing this thing.
Yeah, you see, the part of the success of that earlier free trade movement in Britain which began in the 1820s, grew in the 1830s, and finally led to the abolition of virtually all of the trade barriers in the mid 1840s through acts of parliament, uh, was guided by the fact that the agricultural tariffs in particular, the manufacturing tariffs and raw material tariffs were hitting British industry, as industry was at the time, rather severely. But there was the agricultural tariffs because it kept out less expensive food from entering into Great Britain to protect the landed aristocracy who were making huge profits behind the tariff walls known as the Corn Laws. And finally, when there was a huge famine because of rains that destroyed the crops in the autumn of 1845, and starvation was facing people both in England and in Ireland in particular, there was an uproar. There was a concern about social unrest. Young boys would write graffiti on the sides of the walls of buildings, "I be protected" and "I be starved." And finally, that threat of social unrest persuaded even the head of the Conservative Party, the Prime Minister, uh, 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 Richard Peel, to go along and say Richard Cobden and John Bright, who were the opposition in Parliament, are right that we need to eliminate these. And Britain did it unilaterally. In June of 1846, through the bill going through both houses of Parliament, the Commons and the House of Lords, that with one fell swoop by one act of Congress of Parliament, with no reciprocal trade agreements or anything, Britain established virtually unilateral agricultural free trade. And over the next couple of years, they reduced virtually all of the remaining import duties on raw materials and manufactured goods as well. So by 1847, 1848, and for all of the time until the First World War, Great Britain followed a basically absolute free trade policy, which brought about the rising standards of living in Great Britain and the industrial manufacturing capability of the country that made it, at that time, the envy of the world, as America was then starting to develop in the same way as well.
Which only goes to show that given the power of ideas, anything is possible. Uh,
Absolutely, it is ideas that, at the end of the day, matter. There are interests, and in fact, we're celebrating this year the 250th anniversary of the publication of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations. And he emphasized that the case of winning free trade faced two hurdles. One was the prejudices of the public, by which he means the difficulty often of the ordinary citizen following the chain of reasoning to understand that it is these laws that are causing the economic problems and that the path is ending the laws and allowing free trade to prevail. The prejudice of the public following the economic chains of logic. The other one is the power of the interests, he said. Those who gain from government privilege, favors, subsidies, protections, anti-competitive legislation, they will do all in their power to guard themselves from an open market. But the power of ideas can even overcome that in ways that even Adam Smith did not believe was possible, because writing that book, and not immediately, but over several decades, transformed the world, first Britain, then other European countries, the United States, and give us the standard of living that we around the world take for granted today, what, that might never have occurred if not the power of Adam Smith's free trade ideas.
yeah, and when he wrote that book, he was of the mindset, "Oh, I'll never see these ideas. It's too difficult, too
Yes,
difficult." So you just never know, which is why you keep persevering because you never know what the power of ideas can do around the corner.
absolutely.
On that note, we'll wrap things up. Thank you all very much for tuning in. Thank you again for your great support of our work. We need your support, as I said at the beginning of this show, that need your support for the coming year. We'd be very, very honored and grateful for your great support as you've done for the last 36 years. Richard?
And if I can just add here, uh, I've worked with Jacob Hornberger at the Future Freedom Foundation since its founding and really beginning of operation with the publications in 1990. And I know mine is going to sound like a biased view, but I can honestly and sincerely say to each and every one of you, there is no organization that has attempted from its beginning to be as consistently principled in defense of individual liberty, free trade, free enterprise, and laissez-faire. A government that is important but should be limited to securing our freedoms and not violating them. And that Jacob Hornberger, as the president of this foundation, has stood consistently and principled in defense of those ideas. So if you can continue to support the foundation and the fine work that it is doing, I can assure you Jacob Hornberger, and to the extent that I participate with him in these activities, I too will do all in the power to see that those ideas are presented in the most clear, articulate, and persuasive way to bring about the trend changes that we need to make America, in not the way Trump talks about, great again in the spirit of liberty.
Well, thank you, Richard. That's very nice. And let's face it, the reason that you and I have been friends for so many years, more than 36 years, the reason that you were helping me start FFF in the early days, is because you and I are on the same mindset, not only on philosophy, but also on methodology, the power of ideas on liberty, but also the principled approach, the uncompromising approach to breaking through the dark times in which we live. So thank you for your words and thank you for working with us for so long. On that note, we'll wrap things up. We look forward to talking to you next week, Richard.
Until next time.